Today we're going to continue in our study in the Old Testament as we look at the building of a nation. Now I know that history is not everyone's strong suit. Some are not don't really enjoy studying history. And I can understand some of that. I can understand. Everybody do well in history classes in school? Guy, I know, yeah, a few of you, I can kind of predict who would do well, yes. Some of you just took up space, I know, I understand that. But the great thing about studying Old Testament history is that it isn't static. You know, as you study a lot of other history, it's just kind of static. You know, you're studying 4 years of a person's administration. You know, they serve as a president for 4 years, and then somebody else comes in, and that person may kind of undo a lot of the things that the previous person did. So I hear. So it's you're kind of looking at 4-year or 8-year blocks of time. In Old Testament history, however, from the very beginning in Genesis, all through the history of the Old and New Testament, it's always pointing ahead. It's always pointing ahead to something else. It's never static. Today we're going to be discussing Passover, and we started that last week, and we'll continue that and go a little bit today. When we holidays, we look at family gatherings, usually. You know, if you're in town, or, you know, in many cases you have your family gathering. Hey, it's Thanksgiving. What are you going to have for Thanksgiving? Turkey. All right, and what are you going to do to that turkey? Roast it. Okay, everybody going to roast it? Okay. Now, do you roast your turkey, cook your turkey the same way this year that you did last year? And do you have the same side dishes? Geez, don't invite me to your place. We often will have. There are things that, we're kind of stuck on certain things, or we have some traditions, and so we'll continue those for a few years. But then there's always some things that we like to tweak about it. Those of you that watch, the Food Network, for instance, for months before Thanksgiving, there's always different ways to cook a turkey. And so maybe this year, instead of roasting it, we're going to deep fry it, or we're going to boil it, or we're going to spit roast it, or whatever. There's always something that we like to do, or maybe just a different gravy to get out of the rut that we sometimes find ourselves in. And we just like to do things a little bit differently sometimes. Today we're going to look at a meal that didn't change for hundreds, thousands of years. I mean, every Passover that you attended, you were going to eat the same thing. You were going to eat it prepared the exact same way. And yet people looked forward to that. They looked forward. Even the kids looked forward to it. And it's not like your 15-minute Thanksgiving meal where, everybody sits down and, kind of throws the food around, or put everything on the lazy Susan and give it a whirl, and, everybody's with their spoons trying to get the stuff out. It wasn't like that. I mean, the Passover meal could go 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. Imagine trying to keep your kids at the table for 6 hours. Possible. But again, everyone looked forward to the Passover meal, which was amazing. If you have your Bibles, I would invite you to turn with me to Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12. And if our versions are not exactly the same, it's okay, it'll work out. Exodus chapter 12, beginning at verse 1. Now remember, remember the background. Okay, remember the background. The Jews had been in Egypt in bondage, for 400 years. God called Moses to go and tell the Pharaoh to let his people go. Pharaoh says basically no. He does that 9 times. God has sent different plagues and different things on the people and on the land to try to force Pharaoh to do that. But every time Pharaoh would eventually say, no, I'm not going to let your people go. I'm not going to let these millions of slaves go. And so God has told Moses, what I'm going to do, Moses, is I'm going to bring one more plague on the people. And I'm going to kill the firstborn of every family. That would include, multi-generations. It would also include the animals, and all kinds of things would be involved here. I'm going to kill the firstborn of each family. However, I'm going to protect Moses, you and your family, if you will do what I will tell you to do. And that's where Exodus chapter 12 comes in. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household." So this is the first congregational meeting that we see in the Bible. This is the first time really that Moses has gotten everybody together, all the Jews that had been in slavery. The first time he'd been able to get everybody together. And he tells them that they're going to go and take a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons, according to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. Now, what they're doing here, what he's saying is, if you have one lamb should feed between 10 and 20 adult males. All right, so if you have a small family, you need to kind of combine with someone else. If the Pierces were going to celebrate Passover today and there's only the 2 of them, if the kids aren't around, then you would need to combine with the Lengyels, and if you can't come up with 10, you need to combine with the Holzheiters and whatever. And so eventually, once you got 10 people, then that would constitute a lamb for you to kill. Obviously, if you had a larger family, you would need to kill more lambs. But they made kind of a big deal about how many people would be necessary. Now he says, your lamb shall be without blemish, a male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Now, again, a couple interesting points here. The first is that they were to select the lamb on which day? On the 10th. Now, they weren't going to kill the lamb until the 14th. All right, and they would need to kill the lamb. The slaughter time was between 3 and 6 in the afternoon. And that's when, all the Jews would be out slaughtering their lambs. That wouldn't be a happy time, I don't think, out, in the neighborhood. But on the 10th, they would need to go and select their lambs. Now, I don't know, I never have been able to figure out how they got them, how they paid for them, or if they had to barter or something. But somehow they had to get, a lamb that was blemish-free. So that would be even, more costly for people, and it needed to be a lamb a year old. Now, if all the Jews are looking for a year-old blemish-free lamb, that supply and demand is going to do what? drive the costs of it up. So I mean, this was something that was very costly for them. Excuse me. And they were to take it and bring it home. Well, where are you going to put it? The backyard? Did you have a fenced-in lot in slavery? No, you would have to bring the lamb inside your house. And the lamb would have to basically, and I'm getting a lot of strange looks right now. But imagine living with the lamb for 4 days. I don't know if you have to take it out at night. I'm not sure how they take care of some of the necessary functions, but you had to live with it. Now, what would be the purpose of that? If any of you have, do any of you have pets? Okay, how long did it take for you to warm up to your pet? Not long at all. I mean, when we got Miggy, we went and, I picked him up and carried him around Pet Supply or whatever, and within 10 minutes, I was taken. But imagine having a lamb, and here you're living with it for 4 days. If you have children, your children are going to love this lamb, and it's going to be wonderful. So at the end of 4 days, you had a special relationship with that lamb, which made it even more of a sacrifice when you knew that at 3 o'clock, in a couple days, I'm going to have to go out and cut its throat. Well, that's what would have to be done. That's what they had to do, and it's just interesting to realize that they lived with it for that period of time. And so they had to kill the goat, and they would have to drain the blood out. And we'll go on in verse 7. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on a fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted, its head with its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning, you shall burn. All right, so again, interesting that it had to be roasted. So there was, the idea of fire and kind of a purification there that was going on. And first they would have to drain the blood, and they would take a hyssop branch and they would paint the doorpost and the piece above, and that was the direction given. Now, interesting. We don't see anything about any ritual here or any explanation. I could kind of imagine taking the kids outside, and as you're painting the doorpost, kind of explaining what's going on. But we don't see anything like that. During the Passover meal, it would be explained a little bit more, but that we didn't see anything about the fact that there was any ritual involved in this. And then again, they would take it out and they would roast it. And that idea of painting, that idea, the blood, the idea of a sacrificial death that would be necessary to save God's people. Now that's going to become, of course, more apparent here in a few moments. An animal was killed so that the firstborn could be saved. An animal killed for a human. It wasn't a perfect sacrifice, but it was all that they could do at that time. And we see that they were to eat it with the bitter herbs and with other things. We've talked about all the elements that were on the Passover table before. We've actually had many of those elements here, and that was a happy time as we ate some of the bitter herbs and some other things, and maybe we'll do that again this year. I don't know. But So they had, these things that they were to be eaten, and again, they couldn't save any of it, in Tupperware for tomorrow's meal. They had to eat everything that night. It had to be totally consumed, or they would have to. They needed to burn it. In verse 11, in this matter you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. You shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. Now, that's kind of an interesting thing, and why was that done? Yeah, he had to be ready to go because the Pharaoh was, when he found that his firstborn son was dead, he told the Jews, and this would have been the middle of the night, he told the Jews, get out. Get out. And so they had to be ready to go. And so that first generation's Passover, you ate it with sandals on, which, you didn't wear sandals inside. You had to tuck your robe into your belt, so you could run, and you had to carry your staff. And so that's how you had to kind of wolf down this meal, which was, kind of an interesting way of doing it. But things would certainly change over time, and we'll talk about that in a little while. Verse 12, for I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day shall be a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a fast to the Lord. Throughout your generations, as a statute forever, you shall keep it as a feast. Okay, how often were the people to eat this meal? Once a year, yeah, exactly. On the first month, which was Nisan, and on the 10th you would select the lamb, and on the 14th you would kill it. And so they would do that for years and years and hundreds of years, hundreds of generations. This would be done every year. Wherever the Jews were, whether they were in bondage or whether they were in exile or wherever, they would still make arrangements to celebrate this meal. Many hundreds of years later, Jesus and his disciples gathered to celebrate that same meal. This was going to be the last time that Jesus would celebrate the meal.